Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the very least comfortable show on the web. The system is down, and this is going to be one uncomfortable for me today. I've talked about this on last week's episode and told you what we're going to be doing here. I want to have my mind changed. I am open to thoughts. I'm just exploring truth and trying to figure out what truth is. So, got a great guest. It's you know him, you love him, and we'll introduce him in a minute. Before we do that, here is something to get you, all warmed up and juicy.
The following is a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
Remember a simpler time when it was okay to be weird, have fun, and think for yourself?
Well, those days are over. The art of conversation itself is dead. Sacrificed on the altar of divide and conquer and disguised as political correctness and spared feelings. I believe that unity can only come from truth, and that the only way to find truth is by exploring and embracing our valuable differences and having civil, open-minded, and uncomfortable discourse. Conspiracies, politics, religion, and all the taboo topics are mainly just praise you don't bring up around the Thanksgiving dinner table. We are here to literally change the world one uncomfortable conversation at a time. So if you're easily offended, put your big girl panties on and buckle up, Buttercup, because you chose to be here. I'm Dan Smots, you are the power, and this is The System is Down.
Yes. Welcome back. Welcome to another fantastic episode of The System is Down. Now, we are not going to waste too much time here at the beginning because that's not what you're here for, but I do have to, of course, kill that music. Okay. I do have to, of course, give a big shout out to all my wonderful sponsors, first and foremost being you guys in the Downers Club, my producers, people like Ellen Gomez, Jack Casey, Rick Duran, Javari, Edward Middlebrook, Andrew Sichling, Paul. I'm going to skip to the end because I usually start out and then I get lost halfway through. So we'll start with We Are Libertarian, Stephen Hartman, John Odermatt, Tim something, Champion Pundit Academy, Dave, Mary Rome, Justin Zielinski, and more. If you want to be on that list, if you want to be forgotten, join the Downers Club at patreon.com/The System is Down, where you'll get more weird, more raw, more offensive, more weekly bonus content. Patreon.com/The System is Down. We are also sponsored by a very new sponsor, the Royal Green. It's this book, and I do a much better job at advertising for the Royal Green than Spike Cohen does. But yes. Jack Casey's new book is phenomenal, I hear, and my wife is actually reading it, so I know what it's all about. And you should pick it up at theroyalgreen.com. And Jack Casey was just on the show. That episode will come out probably before or around the time that this one does. So if you want to find out all the information about this book, I liken it to, from my understanding, Romeo and Juliet meets The Matrix. So if that intrigues you, with some libertarian bends as well, if that intrigues you, go check it out at theroyalgreen.com. Also, we are sponsored by Kratom, which I am drinking right now and gives me this warm, youthful glow that will probably be inappropriate for the conversation I'm about to have. But freeounceofkratom.com, you can get a free ounce of Kratom. Spike, have you ever tried Kratom?
I have not. I have not.
Okay, never mind. You can also try Delta THC. That's right. You can buy weed at freeounceofkratom.com or mybrainbotanicals.com. Enter the promo code TSID for 5% off your entire order. All right. And how do I get rid of this? Okay. This is a conversation that I have my thoughts on. I am open, completely open, and I'm joined by a magnificent guest today, Spike Cohen, who is here to give me different thoughts. Here to give me different thoughts. How are you doing, Spike?
I'm doing good, man. I'm just real excited about becoming your newest patron, so you can never actually say my name on the show. It just scrolls by really fast. That was that probably made sense when you had 4 patrons, and you could just name them off as it went by.
But now it's
like that same segment of time. You're like, thank you to We Are Libertarians and Bill something, and thank you. Thank you so much.
It was never guaranteed. I didn't even have credits when most of those people joined, so it was never guaranteed anyway.
That's true.
So
it
is what it is.
That's a good point. It is what it is. And Jack Casey's book, which is there is a butterfly with a knife, and I think that's.
In which book
is that the one with the butterfly with? It's on one of them.
Not the Royal Green.
Oh, okay, it's one of them. It's the sequel.
In Silver Throned. It's the second one.
Yes.
I even have the books.
With a knife.
I even have them.
I do not. I don't have the books. I just have a picture of them, and we noticed that there
me.
was a butterfly with a kniff.
He said, "I asked."
Well, probably
him
because you're a better sponsor. You're a better person to sponsor than we are, because we just make fun of the cover. Yes. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I wish that we were together on happier circumstances, because I don't.
Yes.
You know, it's hard to not make the jokes around you, and this is a very serious topic, but it can be what it will be. It will be what it will be.
Yes, we're not gonna make fun of the topic. We're just going to be the clowns that we are.
I'm not going to make any guarantees
about a serious stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I'm not going to make fun of the topic, but yes. Godspeed to whatever you choose to do.
Thank you. So the topic, I'm sure everybody knows, because that's why they clicked on this, but it's the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin situation and the trial specifically. I mean, let me start by saying, and Spike, I'm sure you know this. Do you think that I am a bootlicker, cop lover, racist, or anything of the sort?
I came on the show specifically to tell you that you are those things. No, you're not. No, you're none of those things. No. And you're not a racist, and you're none of that. You're none of those things.
Right. So, I have just as many issues with the police as the next libertarian or you, Spike Cohen. Mm-hmm. I just look at this thing, and I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know. And this is a sticky situation, because as much as I would love to see all the police go away, as long as we are living in the society that we are currently in, I have some issues with. So let me preface also by setting the stage a bit. I heard the results. I saw all the libertarians posting, "Oh, justice was served," and I thought, I'm not quite sure. And you are one of those libertarians who posted "Justice is served," and I would like to hear more. Well, we can just start there.
So I think one of the big things is, and I think some libertarians and just people in general, that's a great shot of you. Some libertarians and folks in general, they see that there was this essentially a mob, an angry mob. And I would say that at least when it came to Derek Chauvin, their anger was justified. But we had an angry mob, not just in Minneapolis, but around the country, that was essentially demanding that Derek Chauvin be found guilty. We even had Maxine Waters, who was a sitting congresswoman, who made such allusions to why it needed to absolutely be a guilty verdict that the judge in the case is saying that Derek Chauvin actually has a fairly good chance at an appeal because of what a sitting congresswoman was saying in terms of, it has to be a guilty verdict and not just manslaughter but murder. Hey, great! By the way, great job. Yeah. Well, and great job, guys, for if Derek Chauvin ends up walking or getting a reduced sentence, it'll be because you guys couldn't just keep your mouths shut. So fantastic work on that one.
Yep.
Here is my thing on this. And so in the midst of that, you have people saying, you better vote guilty, you better vote guilty, you better vote guilty. And then the jury votes guilty and they're happy. A lot of us are sitting here thinking, well, did they vote guilty because he was guilty, or did they vote guilty because they were scared they weren't going to make it to their car if they didn't? Right. And I think that is a legitimate concern about what's going on here, is that there was an aspect of mob justice in terms of what people wanted. The reason I said that the verdict was just was absent all of those other factors. Okay, because if there had been an angry mob standing outside during the Casey Anthony trial, which oddly enough she was found not guilty, but if there had been an angry mob demanding that
less guilty. If there was a mob.
But if that had happened, right? If there had been an angry mob out there and she had been found guilty and they had cheered and applauded, I would have said, okay, well, I'm glad that she was found guilty. We need to address the fact that there is this growing mob that's happening and how we can deal with that. Because I mean, some of it came out of legitimate anger and frustration. It's now molding into something else and we can talk about some other cases where I don't think the anger is justified, that some of the more recent cases, but we can talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Looking at just the facts of this case, Derek Chauvin already had George Floyd in custody. He was already detained. He was on the ground. Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck and basically slowly suffocated him over the course of 8 or 9 minutes until he lost consciousness and then eventually lost his pulse. Another police officer came over, checked, and saw that he did not have a pulse, and Derek Chauvin continued to keep his knee on his neck for a good almost 2 minutes after that. This was the action of someone who was trying to kill someone else, and that's what the jury based this on. I actually had Seth Stoughton, who was one of the expert witnesses in the Chauvin trial, and he didn't speak about this specific case on my show. We just talked about police brutality in general and the policies that lead to that. He can't speak about the case because it's he hasn't even been sentenced yet, and there's
because he has more class than President Biden and Kamala Harris do.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That makes sense.
Well, that's a low bar indeed, but
it
yes.
really is.
So, and interestingly enough, Biden is the architect. He created all the policies that led to an increasingly unaccountable and militarized police that are enforcing victimless crime laws. And Kamala Harris is one of the most brutal enforcers of the laws that he put in place. So of all the people that I want to hear from about this case, those are the last two that I want to hear from.
Right.
And unfortunately, they were among the loudest. But one thing that Seth Stoughton talked about, and Seth Stoughton is a law professor, a former police officer, and an expert in police use of force. And he said the reason that we have that this is a murder conviction, because some people said, George Floyd had drugs in his system. George Floyd had, heart problems and everything else. Now, he was able to walk around just fine, and it would be a hell of a coincidence that he died of health problems while having his face smashed into a curb and his neck being pushed down by someone's. That's a heck of a coincidence there that's when he would die. But even if that's the case, there's something called the causal chain. And basically what that means is, this is kind of a legal, legalese, legal jargon. And basically what it means is, so if you were walking down through the woods and you saw me and I'm having a heart attack or I'm choking to death or something like that, and you come up and I'm saying, please help, and you pull out a gun and shoot me in the head, you are now guilty of. I know you wouldn't. I know you would not
strangle you.
Yeah, I know you would. You'd find a pillow in the woods and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." No. Yeah. So, but if that were to happen, if person A shoots person B while person B is in the midst of dying, person A is still guilty of at least manslaughter, if not murder. I mean, that would be up to them. But they're guilty of homicide, and here's why. Even if they had walked away and that person had still died, the fact that they got involved and actually hastened the death, it makes them guilty of that homicide. So once the coroner determined that George Floyd was killed as a result of that there were other factors involved that mitigated it, but that it was ultimately caused by Derek Chauvin, it was really at that point an open and shut case. All that really had to be determined was, did Derek Chauvin have a reason to believe that he needed to continue to use force in order to protect himself or those around him? And he didn't. He didn't even need use of force to have compliance. A body without a pulse cannot resist. So that's really what it came down to. So yes, that case and that verdict are just. And the fact that perfect example, the Rodney King trial, there was an angry mob there that was justifiably angry. That was one of the first times we saw actual video footage of police just wailing on someone and beating them up, things that we had been told that had been happening for decades. And often many of us didn't believe it was really happening. And so we see this, VHS recording of this happening, and then they're found not guilty. Now, if they had been found guilty and that mob had been happy and cheering and applauding and dancing through the streets, yeah, it made the mob happy, but it also was the correct case. So I believe that we should separate those two things. There is a legitimate concern about this angry mob mentality and what has led to that angry mob even existing in the first place, and who is capitalizing and exploiting it for ill gains and for bad, for even worse policies that are going to make things worse for everyone. But outside of that, for whatever reason, the jury decided that Derek Chauvin was guilty. Derek Chauvin was guilty.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes some sense. And this is not, I should have also pointed out, this is not going to be like a debate, because I'm certainly not like hard pressed or hard. I don't have a hard stance on this. If anything, I might be playing devil's advocate at this point, because a lot of what you just said, I'm like,
that's fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. But with the whole them putting him down on the ground, him saying I can't breathe, and us knowing that he had all these drugs in his system, do you think that there's a possibility that he died because of, like, I don't know, first off, was the hold that they were doing, was that, I've heard some people say it was in their training and some people say it wasn't in their training. Do you know for sure?
It was not. Okay. Yeah, no, and that came up in the trial. It was not in their training. It would be something that, if anything like that would be used, because there's also the reality, and this came up in trial, there's the reality where when you're grappling with someone, you can't sit there and say, is this hold allowed by my textbook? Like, there's going to be times where you might do something that in that moment, but maybe it wasn't allowed or recommended in your, rules of engagement or textbook, but it's what you're doing to protect yourself or someone else, or to bring someone who is being violent or trying to hurt themselves or something like that. This wasn't that. This was someone that was detained. He was on the ground. He had he was cuffed behind his back, and he was barely moving, and he was asking for help. So no, that move technically isn't something that's taught, but it's also not something certainly not something you would do without any kind of resistance. Here's another aspect to it.
Well,
it is
real quick.
Go ahead.
You say he didn't have resistance, but he was like kicking the cops and like fighting to get out of the car, and he said, "Put me on the ground, put me on the ground."
Right.
Times, so. Right.
Yeah. So all the way up until that point, that's why he wasn't in the car. He actually got in the car first, said he needed to get out, or they got him out for something. I forget what it was, whether he said he needed to get out or whether they got him out because there was something in there they needed to move or whatever. And he kicked at someone, and then he ended up on the ground. But once we're past that, and we're now at a point where someone is lying there with their hands behind their back, they're not moving, and you've got your knee on their neck. And there are multiple police officers there. So it's not even like I need to detain this person or he could get up and trample me or something like that. That they had the situation under control. In fact, really at that point, the biggest thing that the other police officers were dealing with was this crowd of people saying, "Get off of him, you're killing him, you're killing him." So at that point, George Floyd wasn't any kind of a threat to anyone. He wasn't even resisting. And for at least a minute, I think like 90 seconds, almost 2 minutes after he had no pulse, Derek Chauvin continued to do this. Another aspect to this is people that said, well, let's say for a second, this is serious devil's advocate. Let's say that he would have died anyway. He was just so happened to die in that moment that he's being held down, having his face smashed into the concrete. Let's say if Derek Chauvin hadn't been there, he would have died anyway. Again, or no, that we already talked about that, the causal chain. Let's go the other way with it. Let's say that if he had been healthy, he wouldn't have died from it. Okay, let's say that if he had he hadn't had, what was it, 70% blockage in one of his arteries and drugs in his system or whatever. If he had been the absolute pinnacle of health, that he would have survived this. Well, then that still would have been excessive use of force. And when you factor in that Derek Chauvin, again, held him down for well over a minute after he was told that they couldn't feel a pulse, right, I think he would have done it. I mean, again, we don't have proof of this, but all of his actions indicate that he would have just done that as long as it took to kill the guy. And if it had taken 15 minutes to do it with someone that was in better health, then I think he would have kept doing it then. I mean, someone who is told, we have no response, he's non-responsive, and instead of first of all, he should be getting him up. Instead of getting up or giving him first aid or going, oh no, what's going, to continue to just sit there and ignore that or pretend you didn't hear it and kneel down on it. Those are the actions of someone that's trying to kill someone. And that ultimately, and I mean, without going down a whole rabbit hole, they already knew each other. They had worked together. You don't know if there was personal animosity there. Whatever it was, this was the action of someone who he was going to keep doing it until the person wasn't alive anymore. And then you get into the fact, and this, I don't believe this actually comes up during trial, but we know it, and we can make decisions based on that. He had multiple other wrongful use of force complaints, including 2 other wrongful death complaints.
Hold up.
He may have been.
Can you point that out? Because if you bring up, and again, this is devil's advocate. I've said this before, but if you can bring up Derek Chauvin's past, can you bring up George Floyd's past?
You absolutely can. And by the way, and
one of the things that we're
hope,
told is he was on the straight and narrow, and don't talk about his past. So no. Here's the thing. So I'm saying that Derek Chauvin's past to illustrate that this was someone who had done this on a regular basis, or at least was being accused dozens of, or almost 24 times, something like 20 times, 17 times, whatever it was, of doing these types of things. Yeah, it's not going to be brought up in trial because it's not. You have to decide whether you think they did this based on the evidence of that fact, of the facts of that case. Us sitting here talking about it, but yeah, no, George Floyd, and I've said this many times. George Floyd was not an angel. Right.
And he certainly wasn't, Nancy Pelosi and others. George Floyd was a martyr who sacrificed his life for justice. Mm-hmm. George Floyd was a flawed person who had in his past a violent criminal record, who, from what I have been told, was on the straight and narrow and might have been getting off the straight and narrow. Okay. Mm-hmm. If he had drugs in the system and he was trying to pass off fake 20s, things might have gotten rough for him. And now he's going back into a life of addiction. I don't know, but here's what I do know. And here's all that really matters. George Floyd's not an angel, and he's not a martyr. And I that also bothers me, the aspect of people that are like, well, George Floyd did nothing wrong ever. And it's like, no, George Floyd had victims and did bad things. George Floyd was murdered. And that's the point of all of this. When I talk about Derek Chauvin, killing George Floyd, Derek Chauvin didn't kill George Floyd in the midst of him holding a knife, holding a gun to a woman's head or whatever he did the time that he went to jail for that. Okay. If in the midst of doing something like that, a Derek Chauvin or a police officer came in and George Floyd died, I'd say, well, maybe it was necessary to stop the woman from getting killed. I don't know.
Right. This
is many years after that. This is George Floyd is on the ground, not moving, and then eventually not having a pulse. And that's what we have to look at in terms of whether he did it or not. Looking at Derek Chauvin's past just kind of illustrates, potential for, because it's hard for you and me who are not murderers to be like, yeah, but why would you kneel down on someone? Why what, for you who have not been convicted of murder, to sit here and be like, well, why would someone do that? Well, why did he do that? Why do sometimes people do horrific things? And it's hard to reconcile that. But it does happen. And I believe from the facts that I heard on this case that that's what happened.
So you believe that he intentionally took George Floyd's life?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. I don't think that he, so did he conspire? Did he, previously conspire as he's driving up, I'm going to kill this guy? I don't know. I doubt it, but maybe if he has history with him, maybe. I think in the time that he is detaining him and has that last bit of resistance, he's like, no, I'm going to kill you now. And I think that, again, this isn't why I think he did it. This is why I think he thought he'd get away with it. If he's already done it twice, potentially, you start to think you don't get in trouble for stuff. Yeah. And you start to think that you can just do whatever you want. That's part of the problem with lack of accountability in police departments and in governments. Yeah. When they're able to get away with this, then they think, well, maybe I can get away with this.
Right.
And wow, I guess I can get away with this. And eventually someone who, if they had gotten slapped on the hand when they had, tased someone improperly or, pulled someone over for no reason and searched their car based on a lie, after many years of getting away with some stuff, one day they end up killing someone because they think they can get away with that too.
Yeah. Now let me pose a hypothetical, and this is not my argument. I heard somebody make this argument, and that's part of what made me start to question the whole murder thing. So he has a history with George Floyd, and I don't know what their history was like. I don't think any of us do, like if they got along when they worked together or whatever. So the fact that they had a history doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't like George Floyd. What if, what if he shows up and there's this chaos, and George Floyd, he sees this guy that he knew, and he knows that he's got this bad track record, and he thinks, man, Floyd, come on, get it together. And he's like trying to work with him, trying to, like, even in court they said they could have tased him. They would have been justified to tase him or use more force or whatever. But what if he is just like trying his best to hold this guy down? They rolled down the window, they turned on the air conditioner, they said, we're not here to hurt you or anything like that. And he's holding him down, and there's an angry mob around. Who knows what could happen? Just trying to put myself in the mindset of what the cop could have been thinking if he's not a murderer. He might have just been not paying close enough attention to the body that he is crouching on, because he's, he's concerned for his own safety when everybody's angrily watching him. Do you think that there's any possibility of that?
I think that goes out the window when there were multiple times that he did look down, not, for long periods of time, but it wasn't as though he was so fully distracted by the crowd that he wasn't able to see what he was doing. And again, I think that really goes out the window when when an officer comes up and says he doesn't have a pulse, and he continues to just, basically pretend he didn't just hear being told that, and continues to kneel down on him. That sounds like someone who's just making sure that, the pulse isn't just weak.
But do you think it's possible?
Absent that, do I think it's, absent those two things, it could be possible. But I think once those two things are factored in, no, I don't think that's what it was.
I don't.
It's
either.
interesting because
But if you think it could be possible, isn't that reasonable doubt?
No. What I'm saying is, absent those two things happening,
I see.
Then maybe it could be possible. With those two things factored in, no, I don't think that was possible. It's a really weird thing that happened, because if you watch the initial part of that detaining, for the most part, it was pretty reasonable. Like you said, they didn't tase him. They even tried. And again, I forget if George asked to be let out of the car, or if they got him out of the car because they had to move, whatever reason it was, and then George resisted. So
I watched it earlier today, which I don't enjoy at all, but he was like flailing to get out of the car, and he's like halfway out of the car, like his upper body's out. He's like pushing his way out. He's like, just take me out, put me on the ground, put me on the ground. And yeah, he was still in the car begging for them to do what they did.
Right. So up to that point, I would be more likely to think, yeah, okay, this is, this potentially is something went really bad. He had a heart attack while they were trying to detain him, or something like that. I think once and again, the coroner's report says that the ultimate cause of death was from the knee on the neck. Sure. Also, again, I don't believe he was distracted. You can see him looking down multiple times. And then the final thing, the coup de grace it's a literal coup de grace, is that another officer comes up, says he doesn't have a pulse, and Chauvin responds by continuing to kneel on him. If this was, I'm trying to help my buddy Floyd, you hear he doesn't have a pulse, guy's not moving, you start doing CPR, or you get up so someone else who knows how to do it can do it. You don't sit there calmly and continue to do what you were doing that led to him not having a pulse. So no, I don't. I think absent. I think with that, in context, no, I don't think this. I think it was what it was. I mean, when I said that I think that this was the right verdict, I think that he intentionally killed George Floyd. And it was not for self-defense. It wasn't even because he was resisting at that point. It was literally he just, for whatever reason, decided to.
Yeah. So I read earlier today, I could be wrong on this, but I read somewhere that Chauvin actually called, or he either called or he told them to call for the ambulance twice, and to like speed up the process for them to get there faster. Is that? I
haven't heard that. I don't know if that's true or not. It might be true, but again, the things that I lean on are really the last parts that happen right there. He was not distracted in doing it.
They're pretty bad.
It's really bad. Like, it's really, really bad.
Yeah.
I try to give people, even police officers, the benefit of the doubt when it comes to this kind of stuff. I am not the person that, and we can talk about this Ma'Khia Bryant shooting, which I think is a completely different situation, and which is and I do believe that there are many people who aren't saying what they saw on that video because they don't want to make other people angry. And we can talk about that. Yeah, and meanwhile, I don't even think that's as cut and dry as people on the pro police officer side say it is, but it's certainly more murky than people that are presenting it as, the police showed up and just killed a poor child who
Right.
did nothing wrong.
Some
And
might
and
say
again,
he saved a black woman. I don't know.
he saved someone's life. Now
Right.
here, let's briefly talk about the Ma'Khia Bryant thing.
We'll take a side tangent.
Yeah, side tangent here. Ma'Khia Bryant was, as I understand it, she was at her foster home and she was being threatened, or she called the police because she was being bullied and threatened by the other two girls that were there. Mm-hmm. The police officer shows up. All he knows in that moment is that he is responding to threats of violence, to a terrorist threat or threat of violence, whatever they call it in Ohio. Sure. And he's getting out of his car and he sees a bunch of people standing there. Some of them are arguing. Okay. But that's all he sees. He's trying to figure out what's going on. And out of nowhere, a girl runs out, a woman runs out and tackles another woman. The one who tackled the woman is holding a knife and like hits her or something like that, turns around with the knife and lunges at someone else and is literally, there's pictures, I have screenshots of this, of her holding the knife to the girl's neck, about to stab her, and I would presume to death if she could. And the officer has his gun out the whole time. As soon as he sees her run, he has his gun out. He's saying, drop it, drop it, drop it, because he sees the knife, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's saying, drop it, drop it, drop it, drop it, drop it. And right when she's about to stab someone, he shoots her.
Right.
Now, there are people saying, oh, it was technically on her property because it was her foster home and they were threatening her. She was defending herself. Okay, great. Let's say she was defending herself. In that moment, the police officer who's showing up to responding to, threats of violence and seeing someone attack people with a knife does not have the luxury of the time. None of us would have the luxury of the time to go, I wonder if this stabbing that's about to happen in front of me is as a result of the person in the pink who, when I showed up, was just standing here. I wonder if she did something first that would make her deserving of such a thing. And I wonder if the girl doing the stabbing, if this is her property and she lives here, or if the reason I was called was because of this girl, I better let this play out. I think it is absurd to expect that the officer would have done that. Right? Like, I think it would be absurd. And especially, and now you see multiple camera angles where it was not as though the girls were fighting when he showed up. She came out of nowhere and started tackling people. And there's camera angles showing this. And
do we know who called the cops? Was it the girl that was going to get stabbed that called the cops, or was it?
No, it was Michaela. It was Michaela or Ma'Khia. Ma'Khia or Michaela. It was her that called the police, which makes this even weirder because it's like, okay, you've called the police because you want them to come to deal with this. He's here now.
Right.
Why wouldn't you drop the knife? You've got someone who has a gun out, so if anyone else is going to hurt you, clearly he's ready to stop them.
Yes.
What's the knife for at this point? And if
anything, she should have been running to the cops saying, "Hey, I'm the guy, or I'm the one. It's me.
Hey, guy, I just called. It's me." Now.
Right. So she was probably the only person who knew the cops were even coming.
There's a good chance of that, right? Or one of the few.
Right.
But regardless, maybe she snapped. Maybe these two girls have been bothering her so long and threatening her so long, she just snapped. What is the officer supposed to do in that moment, right? Like seriously, what? And I've looked at this video so many times, and it's incredibly disturbing. Because I don't want the cop to be a murderer, but I don't want this to be that, she should have dropped the knife and that's why he kept. But in that moment, what would any of us have done? Yes. Your job is to stop a threat of violence. You have been called to stop a threat of violence. And here someone is knocking people over that were not fighting her in that moment. You have no time to ascertain what's going on. You're telling the person with the knife, just drop the knife. Because then that way you can try to figure out what's going on here. And instead, she's actively going to stab someone. What was he supposed to do in that moment? So that's an example of, where, and I have a feeling that they're going to determine that he was, within his rights of doing it. And there's going to be all this anger and fighting over it. Yeah. Again, what was he supposed to do? So that's, I'm not sitting here like every time a group of people is angry, let's go and agree with them. I think in the case of Derek Chauvin that it was a legitimate murder prosecution and a murder conviction.
This depressing side tangent was brought to you by The Royal Green. Get Jack Casey's book, The Royal Green, at theroyalgreen.com. No, this this does bring up a very kind of the most important thing here. Well, not the most important thing. With all the high tensions and everything, like the reason why the Ma'Khia Bryant thing is called this racist shooting, the reason why every single one of these is insistent that it has to be a racist thing if a black person gets killed or gets in trouble by a police officer of any color, really. The main reason right now is because of the Derek Chauvin thing and George Floyd thing. Do you have any reason to think that that was caused by, even if it was murder, do you have any reason to think that it was a racist murder?
I have no evidence that that's the reason for it. And I actually think the reason that the focus is on race in these situations is the same reason why the focus is on race when it comes to the war on drugs or any of these other things. They're using the fact that you can demonstrate disproportionate ill treatment to a race, but instead of focusing on the reason for it and how it can be stopped, they instead put the blame on something that keeps people divided and has no solution. So if I say to you, the problem is racism, well, you can't really end racism. You can't stop everyone on earth from being racist, right? Like you can't purge society of bigotry. Mm-hmm. So if I make it that, I'm going to put you on a wild goose chase where you're constantly looking for racism wherever you can possibly find it so you can stamp it out. Right? Yeah. Instead of looking at the fact that the reason these things are happening is because police are largely in charge of enforcing victimless crimes, raising revenue for the state, and have no real they get little training other than the militarized training they get with the military equipment that they're given by the federal government. They don't really have much in the way of de-escalation training, and they don't have any accountability. They have no real accountability in terms of if they do something wrong. They have to just go straight to like committing rape or murder or something, and it has to be recorded at multiple camera angles for them to be able to be found guilty of it. I mean, the fact that we in the what was the trial of the man that he shot was named Michael Scott, but it was a police officer in North Charleston in South Carolina. The guy's running away from him. So he empties his magazine into the guy running away. Now, the guy was no threat. He didn't have any weapons. There was no reason to do that. He had no reason to shoot him at all. And he was at his vehicle. So he had his registration. He had his address. He had everything. There was no reason to shoot. So he empties his magazine into the Michael Scott, the guy running away. Mm-hmm. And then he goes and plants something on. He goes and plants, I forget if it was he planted his taser on him. Like he pulls out his taser and tries to make it like, oh, he attacked me with it. And if someone hadn't been recording this from afar, we wouldn't know. He was setting up the crime scene, and yet it was still in question whether Michael Scott was, or not Michael Scott, whatever the officer's name was going to be found guilty. That's the high threshold that we have for police officers when it comes to this kind of stuff. That's why this is happening. When you get rid of those policies and you get rid of this undue deference for people that work for government when it comes to holding them accountable, then this stuff goes away, or at least greatly gets better. Also, by distracting and making it about race, then you can have something like Joe Biden banning menthols.
Doing the Lord's work.
Because if it's not about... Shout out for banning menthols. Because here's the thing, you and I can sit here and say, if you ban menthols, which according to FDA and CDC data is disproportionately used by people of color. In fact, that's their pretext for banning them, is to save black people, which is about the most racist damn thing I could think of. Yes. But if we know that they're the ones that are the most likely to use it, then now I thought I smelled weed turns into I thought I smelled menthols. Yes. And you've just given, I smell mint. Yes. Your smoke smells minty. Let's see those menthols. You've now given the police something else to harass people over. And because menthols are most likely to be used by people of color for whatever reason, that's who they're going to use it against. They now have yet another reason to selectively enforce against people of color. But if you don't make it about power, and if instead you make it about race, then you're able to make the hackneyed argument that, well, actually, we're fighting racism by banning menthols because these racist companies are marketing menthols to black people. And we know that because sometimes they put black people in their ads, and that's racist. If you make it about race, then you can boil down everything to race, and you can skew it however you want to because it's an emotional argument. If instead you say, hey, maybe we should stop having so many police interactions with the public, maybe if we should hold bad actors in government accountable when they do harmful things to us, maybe we should stop giving them military equipment and military training. Maybe we should stop letting them use these third-party training programs that literally teach them how to use the maximum amount of force and how to write it in a report so that you don't get in any trouble for it. Maybe we shouldn't have, there are literally, I've been told that some of these training videos, there are these third-party training videos, and in some precincts, you have to have ongoing continuing education. And these training videos are some of the training videos you can use, online courses you can use to be able to say that you met your continuing education credits or whatever for the year or the 2-year period or whatever it is. Some of them teach you stuff like how to position yourself so your body cam doesn't really catch anything. I mean, this is the stuff that's being taught. Let's focus on that.
Yeah.
And yes, it's disproportionately used against people of color, and there's nothing bad about acknowledging that. But to say that the problem is racism is stupid. If the problem was racism, then there would be no white officers killing white people. Well, that happens.
Right.
Duncan Lemp, Daniel Shaver, these things happen.
Yeah.
If the problem was just race, then it would just be white cops killing black people. Race may be a factor in many of them, and race may be a bigger like societal factor because it's actually more about attacking lower income people with less means, and because of historical factors and trends, people of color are also more likely to be low income. It might be as simple as that. Whatever it is, the cause, sure, we can talk about the catalyst for that specific incident, or we can talk about the root cause that allowed it to happen in the first place and address that. So no, the reason that they're using race is because that's something that doesn't have a solution. That just gets people angry and divided against each other. How easy would it be to unite people around, hey, whoever's getting killed, we can stop it by doing this, by doing X, Y, Z, and that reduces it greatly or stops it from happening. That to me seems like a much better use of our time.
Absolutely. And I have said, no matter what you believe on the Derek Chauvin thing, whether it was intentional or unintentional, the war on drugs killed George Floyd, and it is an absolute tragedy. So let's assume for a second that he didn't intentionally kill George Floyd, or let's assume that he did. Either way, do you think that do you think that there was any chance that he could possibly get a fair trial with everything that was going on around it?
I do, and here's why. He's a cop. I think if it were a private citizen, well, you know what? Even still, remember George Zimmerman. What was the name of the cop that killed Michael? The hands up, don't shoot one. Michael. Man, we talked about Mike Brown, the officer that killed Mike Brown.
Should have been an obvious last name, but whatever.
Yeah, Mike Brown and George Zimmerman, the white Hispanic. Yeah. That was a funny one to me when they desperately tried to label George Zimmerman white. And I'm looking at George Zimmerman and I'm like, George Zimmerman looks part black. And sure enough, his grandmother on his mom's side was a Afro-Latino or something like that. They literally lightened photos of George Zimmerman to try. Now, whether you think George Zimmerman was defending himself or whether he murdered Trayvon or whatever else, there was this really weird thing that the media did where they were literally lightening photos of George Zimmerman, an obvious Hispanic man who obviously was at least partially had at least some African heritage in his blood, not too far back. Desperately trying to literally whitewash this man and call him a white Hispanic. It was just the weirdest. It was so weird that they did that. And we know why, because it was more about racial division than the actual truth. Again, whether you think that George Zimmerman defended himself or whether you think he's a murderer. George Zimmerman was able to get a not guilty verdict. And whether you think that that was a fair trial, a fair verdict, or that they were unfairly kind to him, even in the midst of protests around the world. I forget the officer's name who killed Mike Brown. Whether you think that that was justice served, or you think that he was given undue deference in his not guilty verdict, that was able to happen. Yeah, I think that that in the abstract, I think that if he hadn't done it, and if the evidence had shown he hadn't done it, he at least had a chance of getting a fair trial. I do think that it then, if everyone was still that angry, even if he hadn't actually killed or murdered George Floyd, and it had either been an accident or not his fault or whatever, there would have been a lot of devastation as a result of it. And I would have been the one saying, hey, listen, this was the correct if I thought it was the correct decision, I would have said, hey, listen, I still think this is the correct decision. We also need to know the angry mobs and the rioting and the protesting did not happen in isolation. It wasn't like all these folks one day woke up and said, we're mad. This is something that's been building for quite some time. And now in the era of, it used to be people hearing about this stuff happening or people seeing it firsthand. Now we're all seeing it on cameras. And because some people are so just married and they're going to die believing that police officers can do no wrong, or that, anytime a police officer does something, the person who was killed or hurt, they just had it coming to them. They should have complied even harder or whatever. That creates even more anger. And when you see, when you're being told by the people who are saying they're your leaders that the problem is something you really can't solve, and they tell you to vote for people who make it worse and do nothing to solve it, you're going to keep getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And when you try to protest and police put you in linchpins so that you can't effectively protest, and then they start tear gassing and pepper spraying you, that's going to make you angry. When the what was it called in Minneapolis, they were getting the group that was put together. That was the Minnesota National Guard, Minneapolis Police, Department of Homeland Security, and a couple other agencies. They created this protest strike force, and they were, this was happening over the past couple of weeks. They were tear gassing and arresting journalists, bystanders. They were going after people that had given interviews about what was happening that weren't even in the protest. And meanwhile, there's riots happening that they're not even responding to. There's people getting looted and their businesses being burned to the ground. That's not getting responded to. They're going after the protesters. Local officials say, hey, maybe stop beating up everyone. Maybe calm it down a little.
Maybe it doesn't help. Maybe if you're out here because people are burning things down, focus on that more than the people
focus
who
on
are
the burning down.
This should be obvious, but
more so than the people saying, hey, stop brutalizing us. Maybe focus on the ones that are burning things down. And just to prove that they were making things worse, initially they said, well, no, we're just not going to do anything anymore. If you're going to question our tactics, then we're not going to do anything. And things got better. People would actually go home. The curfew was 10 or 11.
Let's see.
Yeah, it was like, the curfew was 10 or 11 or whatever. The people would go home around midnight, 1 o'clock, whatever. They do their thing. No one was bothering them, so they went home. So then that group, I forget what it was called, Minnesota. It had like a acronym, but whatever it was, they declared victory afterwards. And it was like, no. It was after you left that things got better.
Right.
Anyway, all this to say, when you tell a bunch of people that are watching an outrage happen in front of them over and over and over again, that the answer, the solution, is fixing something that essentially cannot be fixed. Racism and bigotry is not something that's just going to go away. At best, you can just slowly reduce it over time. But you can never stop bigotry. You can never stop prejudice or racism. At least not to the extent that that no one's going to have any kind of prejudice or bigotry ever, especially someone who's already at the point where they want to kill someone. If you say that's the thing, then you're basically saying we can't solve this, so we just have to be angry about it. And if you then tell them that they should vote for people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who created these policies, right? Maxine Waters, the Congressional Black Caucus. I'm going off in another tangent that's also brought to you by Jack Casey's book.
That's right.
Okay?
This one is brought to you by In Silver Throned, a novel by
In
Jack
Silver
Casey.
Throne, featuring a butterfly with a knife. And speaking of which, the Congressional Black Caucus, when the crack epidemic was happening, when the CIA was literally funneling drugs through poor communities and communities of color to raise money for their U.S.-sponsored terror groups in Central America, right? When all of this was happening, the Congressional Black Caucus's response was to go to Ronald Reagan and congressional Republicans and say, we need to work together to pass tougher laws against crack, specifically crack.
Yeah.
And so Reagan, law and order Republican that he is, who never saw a reason not to put the hammer down on people. This is the guy who signed the Mulford Act after Black Panthers peacefully walked around with guns at the state capitol, right? He goes, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, no, what is it, 20-1 or 100-1 sentencing for crack versus powder cocaine, and it will directly affect your communities. And the Congressional Black Caucus said, yeah, great, perfect, fantastic. And now they're doing it with menthols. Oh, the menthols are targeting us. Come on, you got to enforce that. And then what's going to happen? A few years from now, someone's going to get killed, God forbid, by police over some Newports. And they're going to go, look at the racism in our system. No, stop passing stupid laws. Hold bad actors in government accountable when they do bad things, including the politicians. Don't just end qualified immunity for police officers, end absolute immunity for politicians and for prosecutors and for judges and for CPS workers. Hold bad people in power accountable, just like the rest of us would be, and get rid of victimless crime laws, so that the only reason the police are out there is to protect the lives, rights, and property of the people, or to punish people who violate the lives, rights, and property of others. And now all of a sudden, people don't hate the police. Now all of a sudden we don't see constant overuse of force, and when it does happen, the people who do it are held accountable just as quickly as any of us would be when it happens. And now you start seeing an end to these angry mobs, because now the thing that they're angry about is going away, and they're not just being told, oh, it's something you can't do anything about, just go be mad at white people about it. That's how we solve this stuff. And you're never going to get solutions from Republicans and Democrats, because they want us at each other's throats.
Amen. And the whole divide and conquer thing is basically the main thing I talk about on this show, and it's palatable. You see it on both sides, because you've got one side saying that every single cop is racist, or if you're white, you're born on a spectrum of racism. You've got the other side that, especially on this case in particular, like I was trying to listen to some right wingers and try and figure out their thoughts, and they made some good points. The thing that never seemed to come up is those 2 minutes. I kind of forgot about those 2 minutes. That's why, you were at the very beginning, you said that in your opening, arguments. And I was like, oh shit. Yeah. Yeah. That's not a good look.
Damn you for being right.
So that's an important thing that a lot of people don't bring up. They're just like, oh, it's not about racism. And it might not be about racism. It doesn't really matter. But those 2 minutes are pretty damning.
I have no idea if Derek Chauvin is racist or not. I don't. Okay. And maybe there's evidence that he is. And if I see evidence that he is, I'll say he's racist. I don't know if he's racist. He might be a prick. I have no idea. He might just be a guy.
Look at his face. He's a prick. Come on.
He has prick face.
God doesn't give you a face like that, and then you just end up this jovial every man.
But you know what? I have a theory that when people have faces like that, maybe they get bullied for having faces like that, and then they go, when I grow up, I'm gonna kill you in the street. That's probably not true.
Are you blaming the Jews for Hitler, Spike Cohen?
No, that's why I stopped saying that. No, when we didn't get killed for our faces, by the way, I just want to say that. But no, I think I have no idea why Derek Chauvin did what he did. I don't know why he did the other 17 other things that he allegedly did or was accused of doing or whatever. I don't know. He could be a terrible racist. He could be a closet Klan member. He could be a very not racist person who's just a prick to people. I don't know. And I also, to the extent that I want to see solutions, I care a lot less about the end motive as I do about what even allows that to happen in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? Like what's an example? If I'm told, hey, Spike, you can go around and kill as many people as you want and nothing's going to happen to you. We won't punish you. Okay. And I go, okay. And so I only go around and shoot people who have I don't know, dyed hair or, septum piercing, whatever, just some stupid, something that doesn't matter. Like, so for whatever intrinsic quality about a person, or
Sure.
I just don't like the cut of their jib. Okay. And so I go and I only kill people that I don't like the cut of their jib. And then everyone goes, oh my God, he's a jib cutterist. Okay, great. But that's fantastic. And okay, good. We should end jib cutterism in our times. But
I'm gonna make the shirt
maybe
that has your face on it. Says jib cutterist.
end jib cutterism and like an international no symbol around my face like this. Yes,
Yes.
I'll buy one, and no one will understand the content. Well,
No.
anyone, unless only the millions of people that watch this will know what that meant. No,
You get
if well, that's what matters, is that we get it. That's why
right.
most of my shirts are about things that just I get.
Mine too.
People could focus on the reason that I decided, my criteria for why I decided to kill people. Or they could focus on the fact that I probably wouldn't have done it and never did kill anyone before. I was told that I would be held harmless if I killed people.
Right.
Let's focus on that. Because then if I don't have that ability, or if I don't have that unaccountability, and I now won't kill or harm people if for no other reason than I don't want to get in trouble for it, now I'm just a schmuck with a bad opinion, right? Like racism without power is just being an ass, right? Yeah. Like that's that. So I'm less worried about someone having bad ideas and opinions. I'm more worried about them having power over other people. So I think we need to focus on the power aspect instead of the end use aspect. And the reason that the people that are focusing on the end use or the alleged end use is because it's the most useful in keeping us divided, and it's the least useful in actually solving the problem. That's why they're doing it. They don't want the problem solved. They want us at each other's throats.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the Derek Chauvin thing, we can wrap up here in a second, but on the Derek Chauvin thing, my biggest concern, and the day that I texted you, I was just kind of bummed because I was like, I don't know if this guy deserves this or not. I don't care that much about him personally, but
right.
My biggest concern is the precedent that it sets when you've got, a fearful jury. Just making decisions based on that. Not that it's only based on that, obviously. And for the most, right. I believe I agree with you on everything you've said so far. So you've changed my mind on that. But does this set a bad precedent for if you go out and you burn down innocent civilians' businesses, that that you'll get your way? Like, are we just are I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve to go to jail, because he definitely does. Yeah. But is it a bad precedent?
Well, here's the thing, because some people could take it to mean that the reason that he was found guilty was because of the rioting and because of the protesting and because of the threats from public officials.
Yes.
I mean, again, this is not just private sector threatening and acting. I'm much more concerned about Maxine Waters making veiled threats than I am about like someone smashing a window and taking some Skittles or taking some a Lego set or something like that was stolen at one of these things. Like I that's bad as well, and looting's bad. I'm way more concerned about someone with a bunch of institutional power, wielding threats about, veiled threats about what's going to happen if you don't find someone guilty. So yes, there is a concern about that. I won't say that it sets a precedent, because it's actually not anything new. I mean, we saw during the coming into the Jim Crow era all the way up to the 50s and 60s, where there would be people that were railroaded in trial, and the jurors would be told, you find this boy guilty, or you can be strung up next to him. And so people who otherwise would have said, no, I don't think they did it, or we don't have evidence, they just voted guilty because they were told to. And there was a way bigger, lynch mobs are nothing new. Which is why I think we need to look at, when we look at mobs being formed, we have to look at, is there a legitimate catalyst that even led to this anger in the first place? If so, let's address that. Let's figure out what caused that, because that helps to remove the tension that caused it in the first place. If not, then we need to resist it. I think this is a case where, yes, we need to resist the compulsion for mob justice, but at the same time, we need to recognize this mob didn't just come out of the ether, out of a vacuum. It came out of a result of having their concerns ignored and then having a bunch of idiots, or not idiots, actually, they're very
Geniuses.
smart, cynical people.
Evil geniuses.
Sociopaths pandering to them and basically selling them on there is no real solution. You just have to be really angry about it. And then we'll get our way by force. Meaning I'll get my way by force and you'll destroy your friends and neighbors community and then, in your own community and probably possibly end up going to jail for it. So no, I considering the fact that there have been other officers who there was actually some decent evidence that they were at least guilty of something that were let off scot-free, even in the midst of riots and protests. I mean, Ferguson was rough, man. Like that was, it was more localized. It wasn't as widespread around the world, but what was going on in Ferguson and St. Louis wasn't really all that much different than what was going on in Minneapolis during all of this. So, so no, I don't think that the era of fair trials is over by any stretch. I do think that police officers are going to be held more accountable, if for no other reason than right now, that's just the climate for things, is that an increasing number of people, thanks to HD cameras everyone's carrying around, now we can't just have undue deference. We watch this stuff. We watched the two cops that tear gassed the active duty U.S. Army guy. And he had done nothing wrong, and they pulled him over because they couldn't see his license plate, but he had a temporary tag, and they could see it once they pulled him over, which means they should have let him go because that was why they were pulling him over. So instead, they came out with their guns drawn, demanded he get out of the car, made threats of tasing him, and then tear gassed him when he kept asking them, "You have to tell him, I'd like to know why I've been pulled over. You have to tell me that." These types of things, we can't ignore it anymore. In the past, what we would have heard is, well, police officers, they tased someone who was he had a gun in the car and he was being unruly, and they saved their lives by tasing him. Well, now we have the video or by pepper spraying them. We have now the video to show that's not the case. So I do think there's going to be more justice for bad officers when they do bad things. But I also think that, we should be, with this Micaiah or Michaela Bryant thing, I'm watching it closely, and absent any other evidence, I can't see what else that officer was supposed to do. I'm not even saying that Micaiah or Michaela was in the wrong.
Micaiah,
she may have been defended.
It is Micaiah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not even going to say Micaiah was completely in the wrong. She may have been defending herself. She may have snapped. They may have been, been ruthless to her. In that moment, what was the officer supposed to do? Yeah. And we need to say that. We need to say that,
even if he wasn't an officer, if you were there, if anybody was there who's
this person
there to protect you or has any interest, or just walking by bystander, they would be justified if they see that to shoot the person who is about to take the life of another person. I don't. That's my opinion, but
imagine. Yeah, no, it's whoever it is. Imagine. Let's do the hypothetical. The officer does go, oh, you know what? In this climate, I don't want to shoot anyone unless I am absolutely certain that this isn't their home. So I'm going to let her stab her. Woman. Cop stands by as a black woman, a black teenager, or a black woman is racism. Murdered in front of him. Yes. What was he supposed to do? Like, I would love for someone to show me evidence or something that it demonstrates that he was supposed to do something else in that moment. And the one thing I will say, the people that have said, well, he could have tased her. I don't know if he had a taser, but I also know tasing isn't like, it's not like the movies, like, oh, someone who's 15 feet away, I can just tase them like that. Like, also, she had a deadly weapon. Tasing is for non-compliance. Right. It's not for a deadly weapon. And, if you've ever taken any kind of defensive shooting classes, if someone has a deadly weapon, you're able to bring out your deadly weapon. And if they brought a knife to a gunfight, then it is what it is. And you don't shoot to wound, you shoot to kill. Because if you shoot to wound, it might just make
her in the leg or shot the knife out of her hand.
Yeah, I'd like to see someone even just hit her anywhere in the midst of that. Like, anyone who's done any real shooting knows, even before you bring in the nerves of being in that moment, that just even hitting someone that's moving is hard enough, much less their knee or their hit them in the wrist and all this stuff, like your quick draw McGraw. Right. But what if he hadn't? And now that the whatever the lady's name who was in the pink jumpsuit, now she's dead. Mm-hmm. Did her life not matter?
Right.
It's something to think about.
It is something to think about. I feel like that one's pretty cut and dry, but just like with the George Floyd one, more evidence will come out as we go, and hopefully justice will be served. But Spike, thank you for doing exactly what I knew you would do, which is get me back on the straight and narrow. I spent a week with you on the road, and there were like several things that going into it, I was like, I disagree with him on this and that, but I don't really care. And just having casual conversation with you changed my mind every time. So that is why you are here, and that is why you do what you do, and you do it so well. And
thank you.
Tell everyone about yourself and the things that you do and where they can find those things, because it's not all just whatever this was.
That's really vague, and I could go many places with that, but I'm gonna stick to the straight and narrow on this. So I am right now. What I'm doing is every weekend I'm traveling the country to help spread the message of liberty. This weekend I'm going to be or actually this Sunday I'm going to be going to Columbus, Ohio. Where they're pushing for a constitutional amendment that will be voted on by the voters of Ohio. They're submitting their signatures for the petition to be able to have it added as a constitutional amendment to be voted on for the next election to end qualified immunity in Ohio. So I'll be speaking there for the Ohio Accountability Now movement, which includes the Heartbeat organization and the Libertarian Party of Ohio and some others. I'll be speaking there about the importance of passing this. And the following weekend, I will be in Tennessee to be doing a Pound the Pavement event where the Libertarian Party of Tennessee will be feeding the homeless in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And then we'll go knocking on doors and giving out information about libertarianism and talking to the folks who come to help us with the feeding the homeless. The following weekend, I will be in California for the Libertarian Party of California convention. Every single weekend, I am going to either a convention or an event across the country. Later on this month, I'll be in Charleston, South Carolina for an open carry protest that's going to have many different groups, including the Boog and the Black Panthers, again, my two favorite groups that I do gun protests with. And that's what I do. I go around the country wherever I am needed or wanted to be able to spread the message of liberty and work with others that are doing it and demonstrate that our ideas work better than anyone else's. If you're interested in finding out more, my social media, you can find Spike Cohen that's me. I am Spike Cohen. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Instagram. And I now have a website, spikecohen.com. You can find out all the newest, yes, thank you. All the newest developments in Spike theory over at spikecohen.com. I also have two podcasts that are on Muddied Waters Media. You can go to muddiedwatersmedia.com, or you can find Muddied Waters Media on all social media platforms and all podcasting platforms as well, because that is technically a podcast. Or you can find me right here on The System Is Down, brought to you by those 34 people that are patrons who
every single week when we start our new segment called what I don't you were supposed to finish that called
the
thanks
Downers
Mike
Club.
Thanks for being here. Always a pleasure, man, and I'll have to have you back on as soon as you're free again to do something more light-spirited than this, but I think
something more than police murder. Yeah, no, let's have a nice conversation about something.
Yeah, but it is important to have these conversations and to clear things up because the libertarians are always fighting amongst themselves. And when I looked at this, I was like, well, this seems like you're pushing for. And I don't want to open up another can of worms, but another thought that I had was you're pushing for more state, because if you're opposed to the cops, are you still opposed to cops getting arrested by cops? Or if you're opposed to the system, it's a weak argument. But I know that you're not saying completely ban or get rid of all cops, so we don't really need to go down that road.
No, if you want to go down that road, I think that the free market would provide better security services than the government, and what we go through every day is a perfect example of that, because they're largely used to raise revenue and put people in jail for victimless crimes. But while that system exists and it is the monopoly on justice, then they need to be applying it to themselves. And if they don't want to do it, then they can quit.
Cool. We'll just leave it there because you're a busy guy. And
I am a busy guy.
I am gonna.
I'm very busy. I don't want to talk about this anymore, Daniel. I'm very busy. I'm very busy. I have to go. It's a remote. I have to go. I'm very busy. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe on your way out and help us change the world one uncomfortable conversation at a time. And if you like what you hear and you want to hear more, go join the Downers Club at patreon.com/thesystemsdown for bonus episodes of the show every single week. Until next time, please continue to question everything, stay uncomfortable, and I'll talk to you then. Thanks.
This has been a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.